There we go.
Thank you.
All
And we
right.
now.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to dive in? We're ready? Okay. So to kind of piggyback off of what Amy was saying, when we say study away, this is about travel within the continental United States. This hadn't been offered before at SCC. All the options had always been international. And I was passionate about providing this option for some of the things that Amy already mentioned. Affordability is one piece. For students to take off about 12 days for an international trip, that comes at quite a cost in terms of their paychecks. And so this study away opportunity was 4 days. That's more manageable. And then of course, the cost is just a little bit lower than a larger trip. So today we've got a few things we're going to touch on. I'm going to kind of take you through the beginning of the process all the way to the end and what we kind of, if we were to do this again, what we would modify. I'm going to take kind of the first half of the presentation and then Amy will wrap us up. Okay. So to take on something like this, you definitely have to have a clear why. You've got to be passionate about it. And for me, I got to participate in 2 study abroad trips in high school that were organized through school programs. We went to Europe each time. They were 2 very different experiences, but they changed my life. And then in college for spring break, I took my friend to London independently, but because I'd had that previous experience, I was comfortable navigating all of that. And this was before texting and all the other great things we have to aid in travel. So that's a real testament to what that kind of foundation did for me. And then even as a parent now, I'm very comfortable and intentional about making sure my children get international and diverse experiences. So study away provides some of that access for like the reasons we said before, affordability. There's also just comfort for students knowing that they're only going to be gone for a little bit. So if they don't like it or they're homesick, there is an end in sight. And I think that small dose is a great way to just stick your toe in the pond. And like Amy said, it builds some courage to taking on something larger. And that is a priceless thing to experience. And that's really what was motivating me through this whole process. And this took about 1.5 years, this process from beginning to end. Amy, do you want to share your why?
The same thing, really. Because of the diversity of the student group that we took, I think that they're a good sampling, really, of SCC's students. And so my why at first was, oh, New York is wonderful, and it's the most linguistically diverse community in the United States. And I'm into linguistics. And so, that was my original why. But it became different as Shani's recruiting efforts were paying off, and we were looking at, just really the cross-section of different students and their whys. And it really came down to, for many of them, this was outside of their comfort zone, but it felt safer. It was outside of some people's financial means, but this was more accessible. So giving them an opportunity to get out and experience different other cultures and spaces that they hadn't been exposed to before, and let those experiences, I wouldn't say that we inspired them, but those experiences inspired them to want to continue that kind of an exploration. So my why broadened over time.
All right. Whoops, here we go. Okay, so in terms of this entire process, it begins with designing the trip. So before we can even apply to this school for this to be considered, we have to do quite a bit of homework. I I checked out two different student travel companies. I ended up going with Explorica because I knew previous study abroad trips had used Explorica. And I mean, I was nervous. This was a first timer. I was peppering Nicole with a ton of questions through this process. But honestly, comfort level was a deciding factor for a lot of the big decisions I had to make. And so as I was working with the Explorica rep, very knowledgeable person, about designing this trip, I was telling her concerns about cost, length of the stay, and just how does that affect student costs. So for example, I chose for us to stay in the city. So we were right in like the flower district, close to Hell's Kitchen. So when we stepped out of our hotel, we were in the city. I thought that was really important for the students to experience, as opposed to staying in New Jersey and getting bussed in every day, which was a little bit cheaper option. Okay. The chaperone to student ratio, that the smaller the ratio, the higher the cost for the student. I wanted all tips and meals to be included. There was only one meal, one dinner that was not included. The reason being is I wanted students to know that when they've paid off the trip, there's like a payment plan, that they can go on this trip and not have that added stress of what are meals going to cost? How am I going to pay for that? They do have to pay for their checked luggage, and then of course that one meal. And then also the tips. I mean, that's tipping the tour guide, these different things. I don't really, they just came on the trip with the money they wanted to use for shopping. And that's feels nice, working with the rep to figure out what we want to do on the itinerary. If you go to the rep, like Explorica's website, they've got the general itineraries, but those can be modified. I didn't think a Broadway show was super important. That was my naivete. She explained how that's a huge, theater is a huge part of the New York City experience. I trusted her on it. We went to Chicago. I'm so glad we did. I had been to shows before. I've been to the Lead Center. Like for me, that wasn't the big draw. But my oversight missed that a lot of students hadn't had that experience, Then you want to know, like, what kind of payment plan options are there? What does it cost for late enrollment? What if you don't meet the minimum participant quota? What kind of additional fees will the other students be hit with? Travel insurance, all those things. You really got to know all those components before you do this application. And like my rep was fantastic. I mean, I'm just sending her email after email, calling her to make sure I understand how this is all assembled. So then the application process, this is something you'll work on with Nicole once you've kind of designed the trip. You do need to have a chaperone. And, if you get high enrollment, that can increase to 3, but you have to have at least 2. And this is a really important decision to make. I made mine pretty quickly and easily. Upon reflection, I realized why Amy came to mind so quickly. We've had several years of working together. She's been a mentor of mine professionally. I always feel she brings out my strengths. I don't have much self-doubt when I'm working with Amy while she's still making me think critically. And those kinds of things, as you're navigating culture shock with students, you need to feel confident in your relationship with the co-teacher, with the chaperone. It's sort of like parents, you got to have a united front, right? When they sense discord between the two chaperones, the two teachers, that's not good. So I knew then that we could work well together as co-teachers, and then also on the trip with the students and sharing a room, because the days are long. You're exhausted in the evenings. If there have been challenges with the students, you don't want to come back to your room and be stressed out with the teacher you're with, So you want to think about those things, and it is a lot of work. You want to make sure that you're both going to shoulder the work. I personally think it's important that somebody have comparable travel experience. Amy had statewide travel experience. I came to the table with all the international experience. And I remember that was something Nicole had mentioned to me early on. It's good when there's some comparable experience in place. And then all that information is going to be put on the application. Yeah. The next step, as soon as it's approved, and Dr. Michaelis will come back with questions. I mean, he did for me. Nicole will relay those. A lot of it had to do insurance, especially in our post-COVID world. How does that work? Recruiting is really important, and Nicole does a great job of getting it online on the website, posters, you know, getting a booth at different school events. But really hitting the pavement as a teacher is important too, especially because when students see you in the classroom, I visited a ton of classrooms, they get a vibe for who you are. They're going to be with you in this unfamiliar place. They want to have that initial impression of like, am I going to vibe with this person? Am I going to feel comfortable with them? So that goes a really long way. In my presentations to classes, I always addressed what a trip like this would cost if they were to assemble it independently outside of what the school's offering, because there is always sticker shock. The New York trip was close to 3,000. I think it was like 2,700. So there is some sticker shock there, but when I broke it down really directly to show them the value. And then it's more than just presenting this. It's really about I mean, my sales background kicked in here. Gathering their contact information, having them fill out a sheet telling me their level of interest, yada, yada, yada. And then I did a ton of follow-up. I probably emailed upwards of 200 to 300 students across a semester individually. And I got a few to join out of that. I made a video. Explorica provides some great marketing tools like a PowerPoint that then you can tweak to fit what you need. I made a video using that PowerPoint, made sure the video had my face. I don't know if some of you saw it, Nicole sent out. And so that can be posted in the, you know, online courses, things like that. Encouraging friends to join. We did have one gal, I went to her class, and I guess she called her friend right away, who's also a student. And so the two of them signed up together. That's important. That's a great way to go about it. As you're recruiting, you got to be designing your course. It's an 8-week hybrid course. You want to be familiar, of course, with the objectives. Nicole is, you know, really going to help you with this. She has an awesome Canvas master shell with just a wide variety of resources. And something that was important to us was that when we were done with the course, that the students feel really comfortable with each other, can lean on each other, feel a sense of community and real ownership of this adventure they're going on. And creativity is a great facilitator for that kind of nurturing of community. So as we designed our course, we were keeping those things in mind. In terms of the Canvas master shell, here's some things that you can expect. Nicole has a ton of mental health resources because you got to teach the students how to handle culture shock, homesickness, all sorts of things. Great travel tips and tricks. There's a decent chunk of SCC paperwork that they have to do. We had a class session where we stepped through that, and it was, you know, it's an ordeal, but necessary. Great resources about emergency contacts, especially for the abroad trips, you know, embassies, all sorts of things that we didn't have to figure out because Nicole has it all there for us. And that was just wonderful to see. Because I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty tuckered out by the time the class actually started. And then great training for chaperones. Lots of good resources, things I hadn't thought about that I was glad Nicole was providing me, and it made me a better chaperone as a result. In terms of the class, different ways we went about fostering that community is, I would say 80% of the time spent in class was a flipped classroom model where students were paired together to and presented on the parts of the itinerary. So presentation on the 9/11 Museum, on Wall Street. And they were required to have like a pre-activity. So sometimes they were Kahoots, discussion boards, all sorts of fun interactive things. Then there is an in-person presentation, and then there was a follow-up activity, and the in-person presentations were interactive. A lot of fun stuff, and it was just really neat to see the students working together. And then we split up the pairs so they were working with different people, not just always locked into one. There were gallery walks. I tried to get brochures for things. Having that tangible artifact is nice. And then outside of class, we required 2 cultural activities of their choosing. So students went to restaurants they wouldn't normally go to. I know there was a Mongolia restaurant a few students went to. Some students went to museums that they'd never checked out in town. There was a pre-writing, an in the moment observation process and a reflection process, and they turned in a essay, as well as provided photos and different things like that. So it kind of helped them get used to eating foods, going places that they wouldn't normally go to. Amy, I think, is this you talking about the actual trip?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the trip, something that we had an amazing tour guide. I will just say Explorica connected us with someone extremely knowledgeable. There was nothing in the space that we could look at or point to, regardless of whether it was part of our planned trip or not, that he didn't have extensive information about. And his personality was great. And he was with us 100% of the time. And then Explorica also provided security at our hotel. So when we're going in for the night, we're exhausted, we're checking in, we're in a nice hotel. So it isn't like we were in a place that wasn't necessarily safe, but there was security provided on site in case anybody would need anything. And so that was an extra layer of just, we didn't need them for anything, but it was an extra layer of just as chaperones, knowing that we were supported and that, if something were to happen, it wouldn't be up to us to try and make everything safe. So that was great. Tons of walking, tons and tons and tons of walking. You might think that you're prepared for that unless you've been Shani, can you let them in? Unless you've been kind of doing a couch to 5K or something, you're still probably not prepared for the amount of walking. Super long days, but not a single moment was wasted. I mean, you feel like you're going from one amazing adventure to the next. And so I'm going to jump down to those daily journal prompts. That was kind of the reason behind having them. We gave them some guided prompts to kind of unpack the day when we got back to the hotel each night, because we wanted them to be intentional about reflecting on each of the different things that we did, what their thoughts were about it, so that when they got home and they were, really processing the whole trip, they had those moments captured. We had 2 students per hotel room. I would suggest that just to keep costs down, unless, if there is something like, in our case, there was only 1 male student. So of course he's going to be in his own room. if there's an age difference, if there's a significant age difference in one of your students, they'll be given another room by themselves too at no additional cost. But guide students as they are signing up to get into the paired rooms unless there's a reason for them not to, because it is significantly more expensive otherwise. Next slide. Okay, some tips. These were things that we kind of figured out along the way. Some of them we planned ahead, but some we were just figuring out as we went. Life 360. I don't know how many people know about that app. My mother-in-law just loves to know that everyone in our family is arriving wherever we're going safely. And so we set, and there's a free version of it. So we set up a Life 360 app for our group and had everybody connect their phones. And so this was super helpful because there were times when we, maybe for an hour, we would go our separate ways and then we were supposed to come back. Well, when you're a chaperone and you're responsible for this group of students, it's really helpful to just look at your phone and say, oh, they're at Tiffany's. Oh, they're at the Lego store. Or, even within like the Met, when we were in the Met Museum, it's huge. And so being able to open up your phone and know where others are. As a chaperone, that was helpful. It was peace of mind for us. For students, it was helpful because they could locate us and also have that sense of security of knowing they are not on their own, even if it feels like it in the moment. We set up a group text for wake-up calls, reminders, things like that. And that was very helpful in getting everyone downstairs because we were ready to rock and roll at 7:30 in the morning. We had a breakfast appointment. And so just making sure that everybody was on time and together, and also had a direct way to reach out to the whole group if they needed to. Something that was really this was really important for our trip. In particular, knowing your students, knowing what medications they're on, if they have any mental health needs, specific mental health needs. I mean, all students will need some mental health preparation and support in preparing for a study away trip. But if they have any unique needs, being able to sit down with them and have a plan in place and find out what's their comfort level, what do they need from us, and knowing, just having those expectations set up ahead of time helped. When we did get into a situation where a student, was feeling, overly anxious, because we'd had these conversations and set these plans up ahead of time, it was easy for them to communicate that. It didn't feel weird. They didn't hold back. They were able to say, in this moment, I'm feeling this way. And then we already had a plan in place for what we would do, and we did that. And so it was able to resolve itself pretty quickly and efficiently, which made both Shani and I feel really good that we were able to support students in that way. We didn't research this before we left. In Nebraska, it's not completely legalized yet, so it was not on our radar. But as soon as we got off the plane, when you're hit in the face with the smell, what's there, and we're thinking, okay, the age of our students, the fact that the same rules as campus apply when you are in a study abroad or study away trip. Shani and I, as great chaperones and partners, looked at each other and said, okay, we just in the moment said, we're going to address this right off the top, but we're going to get ahead of it before it becomes an issue. And so we just called kind of a town hall and said, gather up, folks. As you can all probably smell, this is legal here. It is not legal for you to do, and had that conversation. But researching ahead of time and being able to have that conversation before we leave probably would have been better, but it honestly went really well. None of our students had a problem with that. They understood why we were making a point to talk about that, and nobody pushed that boundary. And so we had a great experience. Great students. There are times when students may push some boundaries. So we were fortunate that any boundary pushing was not significant or dangerous. But we also made a point before we left to make it clear why some rules and boundaries were in place and what would happen if those boundaries weren't respected. And that we were fully prepared, no matter how unpleasant, to send someone home if that's what we needed to do to keep the rest of the group safe and on track. And so that's some of that housekeeping stuff that happens ahead of time, but it really did help us redirect if somebody, you know, like on the one night when everyone was going to go out and do their own thing, being able to say to students, you know, this is the time that you need to be back. You do need to check in. We do need to know where you are. And if somebody was kind of iffy about that, we didn't have any problem reminding them, no, this is part of why we're here and what we're doing. Talking about personal space, body odors, things like that before we left. Both, you know, students in general, like, you're going to be in close quarters with your peers, and so taking care of yourself, but also what to expect. New York is a crowded space, and that people are going to be touching you, you know, and people are going to smell different than maybe what you're used to or you prefer, and that just knowing to expect that and to be prepared for it, I think was very helpful, especially when we were taking public transport, which everyone in Manhattan does, and was actually a great experience. But just knowing ahead of time so that people who maybe have personal space issues could have a plan in place for how they were going to maybe decompress from that. We also checked in with students individually throughout the trip, and that was really important, kind of being attuned to what their needs were, looking for cues if someone was maybe falling behind or needing a break, things like that, and addressing it. So those are things that we would definitely recommend for others taking on a trip like this. So the final project was worth a significant amount of points. And what we asked them to do were to take those daily reflective journals, those kind of unpacking journals from each day's events. And we asked them to collect ephemera, so, you know, their Broadway tickets or, you know, little keepsakes and things like that they picked up along the way. Pictures, photos, lots of photos. And we asked them to take all of those things and put them together into a multimodal project. So this could have been a physical thing, like a scrapbook, where they're keeping all of those things together, printed copies of pictures, captioning those images, writing some reflections, putting their ticket stubs in, or we gave them the option to do it digitally, to create a digital one, and to make specific connections. So we had a list of prompts, you know, to making specific connections with what they experienced to those course outcomes for a global studies trip and a global studies course. And we were really impressed with the variety of creative final projects that came out of this group. And we know that it's something that they'll have forever too, to kind of look back on. Shani still has hers, and she was able to bring that to class from your college trip, right? Was there a high school and a college, or just college?
I did all three. So my two in high school, so that's from like the late 90s. I brought in these old photo albums and to show the value of this kind of summative experience.
It was wonderful. And to know that our students are walking away not only with the experience, but that tangible thing as well was fantastic. Next slide.
On that note, Amy, Amy set up a shared photo drive with Google or whatever. So at the end of the day, everyone were just dumping all of our photos in so they could draw from those. with these projects too, you know, because sometimes you are wrapped up in where you're at and you didn't take any pictures.
And that's a good thing, right? If you're actually so immersed in the experience that you're not taking pictures. Yeah, so we had a Google Photos set up that we in Google Drive, and I just shared it out to everyone so that they could just dump all of their images in there that they wanted to share. So things we wish we would have known and planned for a little bit more. We knew that there was going to be a lot of walking, but we weren't entirely prepared that as a group, we weren't entirely prepared. And so this was harder on some people than others, but of course you can't leave people behind. So I think in Central Park is probably where we kind of heard the most complaining about people being tired, and it was getting hot and people were feeling sweaty, and it was a long track to the bathroom, and you know, things like that. But it was also one of the places that every student was excited to visit. So it kind of balanced out, but it would have been great for us to spend a class session or two actually walking together, like going to a place and taking a hike together and feeling what kinds of shoes and socks you're wearing, and are these going to be a good fit for you to bring with you, and going to museums together. Those would have been good activities for us to do, maybe in place of some of our classroom sessions, although our classroom sessions were fantastic. The way Shani had them set up in that flipped model where students were really doing the bulk of the research and the sharing was fantastic. But we could have replaced a couple with these outside activities. The hotel is for sleeping only. You are not gonna, letting students know, planning a morning, afternoon, and evening ensemble is not wise, because you're not going to get back to the hotel to change. Traveling lightly, but maybe keeping some deodorant and wet wipes in your backpack is probably a good idea, because you're going to feel stinky and sweaty throughout the day, but you're still not going to go back to the hotel and change clothes. So knowing those kinds of things, not dressing to the nines when you're going to be out all day long, those kinds of things were important. And students adapted pretty well, but I think that when we do this again, we will definitely prepare students better. And don't overload your backpack, and don't always expect to look cute. We did have a student who is an avid reader, and so she just had books and journals in her backpack. Well, when you're out for 12 hours carrying that, eventually it takes its toll. That image there, those were brand new socks. That was our first day there. So even I had really comfortable walking shoes. That was great. But those socks were new that morning. I put them on and my toes were sticking out 18,000 steps later. So I made a trip to Walgreens and bought thicker socks. So maybe that was just a personal lesson. I don't know, but I think it would be helpful to everyone to know, take good socks and comfortable shoes.
So to piggyback off of this takes me back to when I worked with the Explorica rep. I now know if I were to do this again, when we're working on the itinerary, to ask these more specific questions, like, okay, are we going to be on a tour bus at all for this? I didn't know we'd be taking the subway and walking for the entire itinerary until we were into the course. We were teaching the course. So, one student, she was concerned. She wanted to be able to freshen up throughout the day. And I thought we were going to be hopping on and off of a tour bus, right? So we'd have air conditioning. That was not the case. Same with them planning ahead to find bathrooms. The other thing was, we had to be at the Omaha airport at about 4 or 5 a.m. We get into New York City, it's like 11 o'clock their time, and we just dropped the bags off at the hotel and started the tour. We did not get home till 11, after, because we did the Empire State Building at night. So we had students who hadn't slept. They had stayed up all night, then went to the airport. And granted, they're young and they can bounce back better than I ever could. But you know, there was some concern when we're leaving from the airport that there's not a time to freshen up. You're quick into the airport bathroom and you get going. And it's just very different than how we roll here in the Midwest, where you're popping in and out of your car with air conditioning and a mirror. You know, and that's some of that culture shock. I've experienced that, but I didn't realize how to quite speak. I didn't know to speak to it so proactively in the same way.
It's our guide, our guide knew where every bathroom in Manhattan was. It didn't matter where we were. He was like, okay, if anyone needs to go to the bathroom, there's one block that way. There's a really nice one 2 blocks this way. There's one I wouldn't suggest right behind you. You know, it did not matter where we were. But I can't say that every single guide would be that knowledgeable. And so knowing where bathrooms were actually could have been a little bit more logistically nightmarish. But we really did have an impeccable guide.
All right, so now it's time for questions. We got about 10 minutes left.
All over again.
We did ask the students even on the ride back to the airport that if they had known when they signed up that this is what it was going to be, would they have signed up again? And they all said yes. Even though like one gal, she said, oh, this trip could have just been 2 days, you know, which I don't think she thought about the having 2 days of travel and just 2 days there. But the things she really enjoyed only totaled up for 2 days worth, but she was like, yeah, I would do this again. So that was really satisfying to hear. And I would definitely do it again, especially now that I know the process that goes into it. And we've already got a course designed and I'm happy to share that with anybody because this is overload. However, the overload for the 3 credit hours is split between you and the co-teacher. So honestly, like if I do the math, I was like, even for the fact that the trip was covered as a chaperone, it's a lot more work than that financial. It's not an even financial trade. So it is a labor of love. I just like to emphasize that. Just that really needs to be the mindset of the teacher.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would absolutely do it again. It is a labor of love. If it is your dream destination, it may not be the trip for you because you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about your students, focusing on your students, thinking about logistics. You will have a wonderful experience getting to see and experience different things. But the best part of the trip, of this kind of a trip, is watching your students, just kind of awaken to different experiences. And so if that kind of thing really invigorates and excites you, then I would say this is definitely for you. And I was Shani, especially if I was going with Shani, I would absolutely do it again.
Those moments, like I remember the 9/11 museum, we're walking through this hallway where voicemails from folks in the flight left for their loved ones, and I'm ready to bawl. And I'm walking with this student who wasn't alive in 2001. And I'm able to tell her, like, when I was your age, sophomore in college, this is when that happened and how I felt. And having that brief conversation with her was really meaningful. That's very cool. And Amy mentions like destination of your dreams. The Met Museum was my destination of my dreams. So I won't lie, I set up the itinerary for it to have 4 hours, that wasn't necessary, but our guide was great. So he kind of like helped the students who didn't want to be there that long to check out some other things. And I realized I made a beeline into the museum to see the Chanel exhibit. And then I was like, oh shoot, I just left Amy. And we have had one neurodiverse student. And so I'm like texting her, I'm like, hey, I realize I just kind of left you. I'm so sorry. If you need help with that student or any student, text me right away. I want to get into this display because there was like an hour and a half wait line and I wanted to get whatever. And so that kind of communication is important. I think a next trip, I would identify the things that are really key to me and work with the chaperone about how are we going to support each other so we do get one or two of those moments, you know.
That was and that particular student, the Met was actually one of their top sites, the things that they were excited about. And there was this very specific exhibit that they wanted to see too, but they were had a little bit of trepidation about going on their own. And so I went with them, and it was fantastic. And so being, again, I cannot overemphasize how important it is to have a really solid relationship with your co-chaperone, because having that conversation it's a no-brainer. It's easy with us. It's like, oh, hey, I forgot to mention this, you know, and the other person just picks right up, and it's easy. That's important.
And I know Amy would be honest with me about being like, no, I need your help. And, you know, I didn't come home to the room in the evening with her feeling resentful that like she felt dumped on or anything like that. You know, that open line of communication is very valuable.
I was just saying, I was wondering, be thoughtful about what it might take to create some of that without the long-term working relationship with the two of you have. I think it's very possible, but it doesn't sound like either of you had to put that kind of thoughtful
right
as co-facilitators, and so I wonder if there's some guidance or preparation work to be done to help others here who maybe don't have the benefit of a long-standing working relationship with success.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely community building opportunities, especially during the time that, because it's, you know, like Shani said, it takes 1.5 years to get there. And so, you know, there could be some very intentional opportunities to build that kind of a relationship with someone. Yeah.
If I didn't have the working relationship with her, I would have definitely met with her more often. I think I would have been like, let's do those cultural activities we're going to require of our students. Let's go to museums. Let's go out to eat at some place I'm not familiar with, like just to get that relationship in place outside of the workplace.
Yeah, good idea.
Doing the fundraisers that Nicole helped us set up, doing those fundraisers, I had an opportunity, you know, to go and do some, and some of the students were there, and then there were people from the community there. That would definitely be another opportunity that I would say instructors could do together. Shani and I we didn't need to paint and drink wine together because, you know, we're friends, but that could definitely be a bonding experience.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for making it wonderful, Shani.
Thank you. I wish I could see folks. I can just see Nicole and Amy. Hi. All right. Do you need anything more from me?
I think you're good. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye, Gail.